Good afternoon, and welcome to the 5th Annual Columbia University 3-Minute Thesis Competition. My name is Erin Luwaji. I am a 6th-year PhD candidate in mechanical engineering and last year's Columbia 3-Minute Thesis winner.
And I am Beatrice Bonini. I am a 4th-year PhD candidate in political science and a member of the Columbia Italian Society. And I was a finalist in last year's Columbia 3MT competition. And we are your MCs for today's event.
It's an honor to act as a host this afternoon, and I congratulate all the finalists for making it to this point. It is not easy to get here. One of the most challenging parts for me as a researcher is effectively communicating my work, which is even harder with an audience of non-experts. And this is why I love this competition. It is both a challenge and an opportunity to distill your very technical knowledge from years of work to just 3 minutes for people from all backgrounds. Last year, the finalists had the chance to meet with a coach while preparing for the competition, and I vividly remember the blank stare from my coach the first time I tried explaining my research on pregnancy biomechanics to her. She gave me excellent tips on how to talk about my work, and her advice paid off. Not only did I do well in this competition, but more importantly, I'm getting fewer blank stares when someone asks me about my research.
As a no-native English speaker, I truly valued the chance of being part of the 3MT competition, even though it put me out of my comfort zone. As PhD students, we are too rarely invited to share our work with audiences of non-experts in our fields and non-academics. And doing this as a non-native speaker who came to this country just a few years ago adds not only a layer of challenge, but also a layer of fun and excitement. I did my best to speak clearly about my work, while also staying true to my origins and bringing some of my Italianness onto the stage. I truly love the mix of challenge, learning, and entertainment that this competition entails. So I would like to congratulate this year's finalists first, and I hope you will all bring the enthusiasm and passion that you have put onto your dissertation work onto the stage today with us. I would also like to recognize our event sponsors, the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, the Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science, and the coordinated doctoral programs in biomedical sciences. And the lead organizers, Rachel Bernard, and the team as GSAS Compass and the Engineering Graduate Students Affairs team. Thank you for your support and for making this professional development opportunity available to the Columbia doctoral student community.
Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dean Carlos J. Alonso, Morris A. and Alma Shapiro Professor in the Humanities, Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and Vice President for Graduate Education, who will offer opening remarks. Dean Alonso will be followed by Professor Helen Liu, Senior Vice Dean of Faculty Affairs and Advancement, and Percy K. and Vida L.W. Hudson Professor of Biomedical Engineering in the Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science.
I'll keep it to 3 minutes. Good afternoon, and welcome to this celebration of our outstanding doctoral students at this annual event that showcases the research and teaching skills that they have honed during their graduate careers at Columbia. This afternoon, I invite us all to shift our attention to the 14 brave and talented doctoral students who will take turns sharing their research with us. We will learn about cutting-edge science used to stop mosquitoes from biting us, treatments for traumatic brain injury, improvements for vaccines, and an unexpected way to prevent arthritis. We will be inspired to ponder the connection between artificial intelligence and international relations, to consider better models for school nutrition programs, and to learn how school district leaders changed the way they spoke about racism after 2020. We will be exposed to research questions in disciplines that must, by their variety, be outside of our areas of expertise: computer science, epidemiology, marketing, political science, civil, environmental, and mechanical engineering. It is astounding to consider the different questions that motivate these sharp minds. We have come together in the spirit of intellectual curiosity and scholarship to experience very different realms of knowledge. I encourage all of us to make the effort this afternoon to truly hear one another. This falls not only on the finalists who have gone to great effort to convey their complex research to a general audience, but also on the audience. It is our job to listen, engage, and build bridges from our own knowledge to that which we are about to hear. We appreciate the Columbia faculty and dedicated staff of doctoral programs who mentor our students in the research and writing and who have encouraged them to take part in this competition. I would also like to welcome and thank our faculty and alumni judges. You will have some very difficult decisions to make as you evaluate these outstanding presentations. I do not envy you. To the finalists, you exemplify the range and depth of doctoral research at Columbia. You inspire us and make us be grandly optimistic about the future. The best of luck to you all.
Good afternoon. Let me echo Dean Alonso's welcome and add my congratulations to the finalists. So in preparation for this afternoon, I was actually looking up the concept, what is an elevator pitch? And I found out that this actually happened in 1857. Somebody's actually trying to pitch the use of an elevator. So it's a little different from here today. So another thing that came to mind was sort of like, you know, the New York elevator rides, it's never 3 minutes. So this is a luxury, okay? So enjoy the 3-minute pitch. Yeah. So I've also pledged to keep my remarks under 3 minutes. 3MT cultivates doctoral students' academic, presentation, and research communication skills, which are extremely important for future faculty and thought leaders. So basically for every profession that you plan to engage in. The ability to effectively explain your research, something to which you have devoted years of your life, in 3 minutes is always going to be a challenge. You know, just think about how you're going to shine at the Thanksgiving dinner. Because I've tried many times to explain my research to my parents and my family, and I get the blank stares. So I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So I think I also want to add my thanks to the panel of judges. Your presence today illustrates the commitment to our students and to their success. And to the students in the room, especially those of you who may one day be doctoral students, I think I saw a few of them here, this is an opportunity to learn about what is on the cutting edge of disciplines, but I also want you to pay special attention to how to present your research and how the research can be shared with a common, in a common language. Most of all, to the students who are participating today, try to enjoy it because this is supposed to be fun. Okay, so remember that when you're up here. I'm thrilled that we can offer an opportunity for students across Columbia to come together. I think that's really interesting to see cross disciplines, what other PhD students are doing, and placing the fantastic research you're all doing as a focus of today. Congratulations.
Thank you, Dean Alonso and Professor Liu. Before we start with our first finalists, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel of faculty and alumni judges, Clemence Boulouk, Carl and Bernice Witten, Associate Professor of Jewish and Israel Studies, Mimi Shirazuhiza, Associate Professor of Genetics and Development, and James Anderson, Assistant Professor of Electrical Engineering. Judges, Thank you so much for being with us today.
Today's competition will begin shortly with presentations from the 14 finalists. Each finalist will present for 3 minutes using only one slide and no notes, and will be evaluated on both the content of their presentation and their delivery. You may applaud after each presentation, but we ask you to please keep your applaud brief so that the next presenter can be introduced. After the student presentations, we invite you to join us for food and drinks, and make sure to stay for the awards ceremony, which will take place at approximately 4:30 p.m. The top 3 presenters, according to our judges, will be awarded prizes of $1,000, $500, and $250, respectively. Audience, your vote counts as well. Following the presentations, we will provide instructions to cast your vote. Make sure to cast your vote for one student only. And now we will begin with our first presenter. Linh-Han Dong from Biological Sciences, presenting Manipulating the Biological Clock to Disrupt Mosquito Biting.
Thank you. In about a few weeks, when spring is fully here, our lives will start to get just a bit itchier. Mosquitoes love to bite us. Our blood is tantalizing to female mosquitoes because it provides essential nutrients they need to produce eggs so they can survive as a species. So it's not hard to imagine why they have such a strong desire to bite us. As much as they crave our blood, mosquitoes actually only spend a few hours of their day biting. The yellow fever mosquitoes that I study only bite around dawn and dusk. They only bite around dawn and dusk. It seems like they have this invisible alarm clock in their brain that tells them when to bite, but more importantly, this clock has the power to turn off their biting for most of their day, which is exactly what we want to see. Rhythmic behavior and behavior timing like this is not special to mosquitoes. I can say that in about 10 hours from now, most of us in this room will be sleeping. And this is because we have specialized cells in our brains called clock neurons that sends a sleepy message about the same time of day every 24 hours. And mosquitoes, they also have their own clock neurons in their tiny brains. And these clock neurons use a special messenger called pigment dispersing factor, or PDF, to send signals and communicate to other neurons. So I thought maybe I can disrupt the PDF communication that the clock neurons rely on as a way to disrupt mosquitoes' rhythmic biting. So I use a genome editing technology to disable the gene that's responsible for the production of PDF. Without this clock messenger, mosquitoes seem to behave fine in the evening. But surprisingly, mosquitoes without PDF are not active in the morning anymore. In fact, when compared to the normal mosquitoes, mosquitoes without PDF lost 70% of their morning activity. This tells us PDF is important for mosquitoes' behavior timing. When the clock neurons are trying to send an activity signal, without PDF, this signal seems to be not delivered, as if the clock neurons have lost their internet connection. We all hate mosquitoes. They give us itchy bumps, but worse than that, they're able to spread deadly disease pathogens. Malaria, Zika, dengue, these mosquito-borne diseases kill nearly 1 million people a year, making them the most dangerous animals on the planet. My research has shown for the first time that by changing a component of their biological clock, we can change their behavior timing that results in an overall reduction of their activity. And manipulating this temporal control of mosquito behavior is validated by my research as a potential way to stop these dangerous bites. Thank you.
Now we have Mary Kate Dwyer from Biomedical Engineering will present Treating Traumatic Brain Injury with Synthetic Hormones.
So growing up, I think I started playing soccer when I was about 5 years old. And one thing I really remember is that my mom would not allow me to head the soccer ball. Not in practice, not for a game. It was absolutely too dangerous for her. And in retrospect, she was right. And so now what I'm studying is traumatic brain injuries. This example I have here on the screen is from a recent Women's World Cup game where two players went for a header, ended up colliding heads. Both had to be helped off the field, and actually the American on the right wasn't able to return in the second half. And so, especially in sports, we're discussing concussions and more severe traumatic brain injuries more and more often, which is a great thing, but these injuries are clearly still occurring. So my research kind of focuses on how can we help these people after an injury. We're doing that by finding drugs that can actually treat the traumatic brain injury, which is super important because there are actually no clinically approved drugs to treat TBI right now. So specifically, my work uses a novel hormone. This novel hormone is synthetic, meaning that it was designed in a lab, and it actually has slightly different effects than a naturally occurring hormone that we might have in our bodies. And so the way that we test this drug is we actually take slices of a rat brain and we remove them from the rat body and we keep them alive outside of the body for several weeks. We then induce a brain injury on these brain slices that we keep alive. And we do this with a very sophisticated thought-through protocol to really mimic what's happening in the brain as it's protected from the skull, but as the impact's coming in. But at the same time, in practice, what this really looks like is that we physically stretch the slices to a predetermined length. And so after we stretch these slices, we see the same problems in our brain slices that we would see in a normal traumatic brain injury. We have cell death, we have inflammation, and we have dysfunction in the neurons where they can't really communicate properly. And the great thing is that when we apply this novel hormone just an hour after injury, we can decrease all of these bad outcomes. So this is great because I think that thus far my work has kind of presented a possible new therapeutic to help human health. It's definitely a stepping stone, and the future work will involve characterizing it in live animals and in humans, but I do hope that this drug can be used to improve human health after traumatic brain injuries. Thanks.
Eliza Duck from Earth and Environmental Engineering presents Switching Up the Mineral Recovery Paradigm with Switchable Solvents.
Take a moment to picture a future where environmental sustainability is the status quo. That future might look something like the top left corner of this image. I bet you don't picture large extractive mining operations. But what if I told you that currently exactly such mining operations are central to making the future at the top left a reality? Technologies at the core of a sustainable future, like solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, they rely on critical minerals, most of which are obtained from large destructive mines. So we have to harness alternative sources of these minerals. And one such source is salt water. For example, lithium is used in batteries, and about 60% of global lithium reserves are found in salt waters as mineral salts. But current technologies for extracting these valuable minerals are insufficient. They're slow or they're unsustainable. So my research targets these salt waters, and particularly salty wastewaters. I'm developing a novel technology based on temperature switchable liquids to extract valuable minerals from these wastewaters, turning them into resources. With temperature switchable liquids, changing the temperature switches how much the liquid likes to mix with water. They mix more at cold temperatures and less at hot temperatures. You can think of it like a temperature-dependent salad dressing. Our switchable liquid is like the olive oil, and our salty wastewater is like the vinegar. When you mix them together at a cold temperature, water and mineral salts mix into the switchable liquid, giving us a nice salad dressing-like emulsion of vinegar and oil, aka water and mineral salts, inside our switchable liquid. If we separate off that salad dressing layer and heat it up, the water and the switchable liquid can't mix together as well, so our emulsion breaks, and we get a layer of olive oil sitting on top a layer of vinegar. In the world of switchable liquids, this means that the water and minerals that were extracted move back out of the switchable liquid, giving us our valuable product and regenerating our liquid for reuse. Crucially, for sustainable mineral production, separations with switchable liquids are fast, the liquid is reusable, it only takes a mild temperature swing to change this mixing behavior, which means low energy requirements. My research applies switchable liquids to mineral recovery for the first time and shows that in a mixture of mineral salts, different salts will be extracted to different extents, which gives us a selective technology. I examine fundamental salt-water interactions and develop models based on really simple salt parameters to explain and predict how much salt we can extract and how pure that salt will be. By illuminating what's happening in these systems at a molecular level, my research facilitates the development of a sustainable mineral production paradigm to give a truly sustainable future. Thank you.
Julia Davis Parada in microbiology and immunology will present how vaccines generate protective immunity in human tissues.
As a vaccine scientist, I certainly remember getting my first COVID-19 vaccine in December 2020, and I even took a selfie. But do any of you remember getting your COVID vaccine? Yes, but how about a flu, or chickenpox, or measles? If you don't, rest assured that your immune system does. When your body is exposed to foreign material like a virus, it rapidly responds by producing proteins called antibodies and immune cells that are maintained in your body over time as memory. This immune memory is what provides protection from infection if or when you're exposed to that same virus again. And it is this memory that a vaccine is meant to replicate. In my studies, I evaluate the ability of the novel COVID-19 mRNA vaccines to generate immune memory. But unlike most studies of vaccines in humans that only focus on blood, I look within organ tissues, which is where the majority of immune cells actually reside. So specifically, I collect tissues from human organ donors and isolate single cells from bone marrow, spleen, lung, and lymph node, in addition to blood. And by surveying the vaccine response across all of these tissues, from donors in their 20s to their 80s, I have arrived at 3 major findings. First, vaccine-induced immune memory is predominantly stored in lymph nodes, and there are certain types of immune cells that don't exist in the blood at all. Therefore, vaccine development must test on lymph nodes in addition to blood. Second, while immune memory declines in the blood over time, I found that immune memory actually increases in the spleen and is steady in other tissues. And this suggests we may need to reevaluate the timing and frequency of booster vaccines. Third, data suggests that immune memory in blood declines more rapidly in elderly patients compared to middle-aged patients, leading the CDC just last week to recommend more boosters in patients over 65. However, in the tissues, I found no correlation between the quantity of memory and patient age. Together, these findings demonstrate that immune memory in blood does not represent immune memory in tissues. In order to understand the full breadth and durability of an immune response to a vaccine across the entire population, we must study tissues. I hope that this work is the first step toward the creation of new vaccine testing programs that use lymph node samples and the beginning of the inclusion of tissue research in determining vaccine guidelines. That way, you will all remember your vaccines, even if you don't take a selfie. Thank you.
Natalie Greaves-Peters from Health Studies and Applied Educational Psychology presents Nourish Kids, Crafting the Gold Standard in School-Based Food and Nutrition Education.
Children must be empowered to take control of their food environment. That is the core of my research. And my research question is, what makes food and nutrition education effective? And by effective, I mean, what's gonna make a child choose an apple over a bag of potato chips most of the time? To do this, I started to research the literature, and it was such a vast amount of a vast body of literature that I ended up doing an umbrella review. An umbrella review reviews reviews. And throughout this process, I found 20 components that indicates that leads to nutrition education being effective. To understand how these components interrelated, I used a socioecological framework, which indicates that when you're asking someone to make a health behavior, you have to recognize that there's so much that happens at the individual level and so much more that happens at 6 levels above, all the way up to socioecological norms. Armed with the socioecological framework, I then used this to develop a program evaluation tool. The object of the tool is to use existing programs and see if these 20 components are not just present, but the degree to which they're present. Now I have these 2 tools, I have to test them. So my next step was to conduct a formative evaluation of these tools. I recruited 9 participants who were experienced program developers. As were their programs, they were very diverse. And the object was, okay, fine, I did all this stuff in a research bubble. How do these tools translate in the real world? Are they usable? Are they acceptable? How would you improve them? How would you change them? And while that validation process went well, we got an unexpected outcome, a 3rd tool. Because unlike these 2 tools, where you evaluate a program after it's been created, there was a practice-based logic model that came out of this research, and this is going to help practitioners to develop the program starting from the beginning onwards. These tools are not just effective for program creators, but they're also effective for principals and government officials to really understand the quality of programming that we're teaching our kids. But let's face it, we all eat. It's a universal necessity. And so, food and nutrition education, it goes beyond the academic limits. It's a crucial life skill. And so, we want to use these skills to empower our children so they know that when they walk into a situation like this, they can make an informed decision about what they eat. Thank you.
Sonia Sungun Kim from the marketing department presents The Power of Brands, how liking the same brands can help bridge the ideological divide.
Imagine that in front of you, there's a stranger that has a totally different demographic background from yourself, perhaps a different gender or generation. Now, let's say someone comes to you and says, now you have to talk with this stranger about something like the climate change. Would you be excited to be engaged in this conversation? I know I would be terrified. Our society is starkly divided across people from different backgrounds, especially when it comes to social issues where people hold strong views. This divide often leads to serious consequences, such as conflicts between social groups. Research indicates that the best way to bridge this gap is through conversations. The problem is, it's really hard to have people talk about issues that matter. So I looked for a way to encourage conversations. And as a marketing PhD student, I asked whether brands could play a role. Brands are deeply involved in our lives, and many people form their identities around their favorite brands. In fact, in a recent poll, 78% said that they believe that brands have the power to connect people. But when we look at what brands do to engage in social issues, they tend to pick a side. While this can cause some buzz, it also has the danger of exacerbating the division among people. My research takes an alternative approach and asks the question, could brands serve as mediators to bring people together? The main research method I use in my work is social experiments. In one experiment, I told participants they will discuss the issue of minimum wage with a stranger. Half were told that the stranger also likes your favorite car brands, while the other half was told that the stranger likes different kind of brands. What I found is that people were much more willing to discuss a social issue with someone who shares your brand preferences. And this was especially the case when the stranger was from a different demographic background. In another experiment, participants held a conversation with a stranger on an online chat who they believed either liked the same fast food brand as them or not. Before and after the online chat, I also asked participants to indicate their opinions on another social issue, whether to phase out gasoline cars. Results showed that people who were matched with somebody who shared their fast food preferences were not only more likely to stay until the end of the chat, but they also had a bigger alignment in social issue opinion with their matched stranger. In other words, they were more likely to find common ground on a controversial topic. So if you were to ever come across a situation where you need to talk about a social issue with a stranger, my suggestion to you is this: find a brand that you both like, and you're off to a great start. Thank you.
Daniele Neri, in Nutritional and Metabolic Biology, will present Fire Up Your Metabolism, Disentangling Brown Adipose Tissue Regulation via Sympathetic Nervous System.
You know how they always tell us that we need to lose fat because it's unhealthy? Well, what if I tell you that not all types of fat are bad? White fat, the type of fat that most people think of, stores fat. But brown fat is special because it actually burns fat to produce heat. And because it produces heat, brown fat is activated when you're exposed to cold temperature, such as when you go skiing or when you're stuck outside of a bar because all the seats inside are taken. But here's the fascinating part. Just like any furnace, brown fat needs a lot of energy to produce all this heat. So it acts like a vacuum to extract glucose and fatty acids from circulation and use it as fuel. As a result, turning on brown fat lowers the amount of glucose and fatty acids in your blood, which is also protective against metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. So how do we turn on brown fat? When you're cold, your brain activates the sympathetic nervous system, which then turns on brown fat. While hanging out in the cold or taking drugs that stimulate the sympathetics protect against diabetes, these interventions also target all these other organs and constrain the heart, increasing cardiovascular risk. This is where my project comes in. Can we activate the sympathetic signaling all in brown fat so that we get the metabolic benefits without increasing cardiovascular risk? To do this, I need to overcome two technical hurdles. First, I need to activate brown fat without affecting the heart. And to do this, I inject a newly developed virus in the brown fat of mice to selectively target the sympathetic nerves within this tissue, avoiding the heart. And this virus also allows us to turn on sympathetic nerves at will. So we are the first one to selectively activate sympathetic signaling in brown fat without affecting other organs. Second, we genetically engineer two new mouse lines to selectively activate two separate populations of sympathetic nerves that control brown fat. You can see on the right one population in green that controls fat cells or adipocytes, and the other one in dark blue that controls blood vessels within brown fat. Then we study what happens when we turn them on using the special virus from before and a platform that I developed during my PhD. When we turn on the nerves that control fat cells, we see increased heat and increased blood flow in brown fat. This is surprising because we were expecting the blood vessel nerves to control blood flow. Instead, turning on the blood vessel nerves directed the fat to extract glucose from circulation. So to summarize, we developed a new toolkit to selectively activate sympathetic signaling in brown fat, and we used it to distinguish between the function of nerves that control fat cells versus blood vessels, showing that you only need to activate the blood vessel nerves within brown fat to lower blood glucose. The results from a project will lead to development of new targeted treatments against diabetes. But it doesn't end here. The approach that we use can be extended to other organs in our body, opening the study to studying how regulating blood vessel circulation, blood vessel control within organs throughout regulate metabolism. Thank you.
Bonnie Siegler from Sociology presents Framing Racial Equity in U.S. School Districts.
Why do well-intended approaches to racial equity in U.S. schools so often fall short? I'll argue today that one reason is a failure of framing. In the summer of 2020, after Minneapolis police officers murdered George Floyd for an alleged minor infraction, school districts across the United States released statements declaring publicly their commitment to racial equity. I study racial equity work in US schools, so I wondered, what should we make of these statements? In my dissertation, I argue that these statements reveal racial equity frames, and these frames tell us how school district leaders approach racial equity in their school district, both the possibilities and limitations of these different approaches. But what do I mean by frame? Consider the experience of framing a picture. You point a camera lens at some subject and focus in on that subject. Other possible subjects around it become blurred or cut out of the picture entirely. We do the same thing when we write a policy statement. We focus on one framing of the problem, which drives the possible solutions we can take to address that problem. Past research on racial equity work in US schools has mostly focused on one or a small number of schools or districts, in part due to discomfort speaking publicly about racism, requiring a slow approach to data collection. Because of these statements, I'm able to take a big data approach and use computational text analysis methods to measure the frames in racial equity statements from over 1,400 school districts in the United States. I find several frames based on these models, but today I'll speak about two. The diversity frame argues that school districts need to address racism by teaching students to celebrate diversity. One statement said, "We aim to teach students to appreciate individual differences." This statement contrasts drastically with a statement using what I call the power frame. The power frame suggests that school districts, as one district statement put it, should, instead of looking out the window to look at racism, could look in the mirror. This statement said, we should teach students not to be afraid when they see a Black man simply because he's wearing a hoodie. And while this statement may make people uncomfortable, we can also see how this kind of statement and this approach to framing racial equity may lead the school district to drive policies that actually could change the levels of racial inequality in our country, including what led them to making this statement, the police killing of George Floyd. And so, while racial equity has long eluded well-intended policymakers and leaders in education, I argue that part of this is because these leaders fail to frame the problem expansively, and my dissertation offers a different frame to drive meaningful solutions. Thank you.
Palash Bajadia in Civil Engineering and Engineering Mechanics, presenting fresh cement paste behaves like the human body, and that can help us 3D print buildings.
If concrete were a country, it would be the third largest producer of CO2. Now, reducing that would be beneficial, won't it? But we have a housing crisis that requires us to build more and more. 3D printing is a stone that can help us kill both these birds. In 3D printing, we rely on the concrete to hold its shape, to print layer by layer with minimal material usage. And we can also print in hours and not days because we're not using any molds. So how does concrete hold its shape? The main ingredient, cement, it reacts with water, and the two coexist with the reaction products to create a viscoelastic fluid, which is basically both a liquid and a solid, like peanut butter. While the liquid part helps us print, it's the solid part that helps with the shape stability that we're looking for. In my research, I use whatever we know about cement chemistry to figure out what is responsible for the solid behavior, what are its limits, and how do they change with time. I use a technique called oscillatory rheology, where I stretch the material, let it go, and I stretch it more and more in each cycle. So at first, cement behaves like a solid, and it goes back to its original shape when I let it go. But as I keep stretching it, there comes a point, a limit, beyond which the structure breaks down. I saw that this limit was increasing with time, and this hadn't been seen before. So I mixed cement and water in different proportions, changing the reaction behavior, and this helped me show that the solid strength and its stretchability is actually coming from two different sources. Cement particles stick to one another through electrostatic forces, but they only create like a flimsy house of cards structure. But as the cement polymerizes, The chains connect everything together, allowing the material to stretch without losing its capacity. So compare this to a human body, where the cement particles are the skeleton and the muscles are produced by this polymerized cement. So understanding how these muscle works can help us control them and make them more suitable for 3D printing. Now, I hope this leads to more mass housing that is both affordable and sustainable and unencumbered by molds, and regardless of wealth, people can live not in blocky houses, but in beautiful homes that are expressions of themselves. And that, I believe, is not a stretch.
Fitsum Hermias Petros from Mechanical Engineering presents Unlocking the Secrets of Our Senses, an integrated approach to understanding human balance and movement.
What do you do when you're presented with something that's completely contradictory? Say, for example, I'm clapping, but you hear keys jingle instead. Better yet, you're sitting down, you're petting your cat, you can see that it has fur, and you can hear it purring, but when you go in to pet it, it feels smooth, just like glass. What sensory system do you trust? Your eyes, your ears, or your touch? So every day we collect information from our surroundings using our sensory systems. We put them all together, interpret them, give them meaning using our brain and our spinal cord, and we come to the appropriate action. So simple things such as standing in front of a podium, maintaining balance, or walking around are fully dictated by this process. So when there's an issue, either due to age, disease, or different types of injuries, and your sensory systems are giving you signals that are contradictory or erroneous, and your brain doesn't know what to do that, you might be subjected to dizziness, vertigo, nausea. That might lead you to lose your balance, fall-related injuries, or even death. And this is where my work comes in. I use robotics and robotic platforms to be able to diagnose and treat people with these types of sensory systems. More specifically, I use my robotic platforms to systematically alter each of your sensory systems so we can see how well you balance and navigate. For instance, I'd put you in virtual reality with virtual reality glasses, and then I would start rotating the world around you. And then I would ask you, please navigate and walk. And from those results, I'm able to see how well your brain is able to prioritize the correct information from your other senses and reject the incorrect information from your vision. This type of metric can help us improve current clinical interventions so we can avoid the reoccurrence of those falls, so we can avoid the reoccurrence of concussion, and also reduce the amount of injuries that people are exposed to. Furthermore, by repeatedly exposing you to these types of experiments using my robotic platforms, I'm able to teach your brain to trust your normal, healthy senses as opposed to your faulty ones. So for example, people who suffer from dizziness and vertigo and motion sickness, we can highly reduce that with my protocols. So next time, when you're faced with contradictory information, such a cat that might be made up of glass, maybe possibly because you burnt your hand a week earlier, if your brain has decided to trust all three senses, you might think, this is an alien, not my house cat, let me kick it out. Or possibly, if you had gone through my protocol, you would know, this hand is faulty, let me trust my other senses and keep petting my cat in peace. Thank you very much.
Gloria Graff from Epidemiology presents Fast Forward, Are 21st Century Americans Growing Old Before Their Time?
All right. So if you're like most people, you already have some intuitive sense of what aging looks like. You slow down a little bit, you start having aches and pains where you didn't before, and you start worrying about things like blood pressure and bone density. But you also probably have the sense that these changes don't happen at the same rate for everyone. And that's why we say things like, oh, Sally looks so good for her age, or Eric looks like he's aged 10 years since his divorce. Now, maybe you're just a nice person who doesn't talk about other people this way. But the point here, right, is that we all have an intuitive sense of what appearance and physical function look like at a given age. And most importantly, we notice whether people look older or younger than that expectation. As it turns out, this intuition has a biological basis. And recently, scientists have developed algorithms to quantify how quickly or slowly we're aging at a molecular level. Using these measures, we can distinguish between faster agers and slower agers by the time people graduate from college. So in my dissertation work, I apply these measures to the entire US population. I use data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which has looked at a representative sample of Americans every 2 years since 1999. And what I find is that Americans today are aging faster than they did 5 years ago. But not only that, we've been aging faster and faster for the past 20 years. When I look into why this is, my research suggests that environmental changes are a major driver of these trends, affecting everything from our diet, to our physical activity levels, to the quality of air that we breathe. But you might be wondering, well, why don't we just look at a simpler measure, like life expectancy? Because as many of you know, life expectancy has also stagnated and even declined in some years since around 2010, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. But these declines were largely driven by suicide and overdose mortality among white men in middle age, whereas my research suggests that accelerated aging is universal, regardless of age, race, or sex. And so life expectancy is a useful measure, but it doesn't always tell us the whole story. And in this case, it's only by looking at biological aging that we can start to uncover some of these broader underlying vulnerabilities in the rest of the population. And so going forward, my hope is that we can use these measures to revolutionize the way we do population health research, not just looking at who's at risk of death, disease, and disability today, but projecting those outcomes several decades into the future, and most importantly, giving us enough lead time for effective prevention and intervention. Thank you.
Dan Mitropolsky in computer science presents the simplest neural model and a hypothesis for language.
Understanding how the brain computes is one of the most important unsolved problems in science. On one hand, we have a rich understanding of neurons, the cells that make up the brain. There are about 90 billion neurons in the brain. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have a really rich understanding of complex cognitive phenomena, things like linguistics, psychology, human and animal behavior. We have entire disciplines devoted to understanding these things. But we don't have a clear picture of what happens in between. How do these complex phenomena, these cognitive processes, compile down to neurons? The main approach in neuroscience has been to extract more and more data from the brain and then try to somehow understand or find the logic of the brain from this data, the red arrow in this picture. But this approach is really hard. There's a paper from a few years ago called "Could a Neuroscientist Understand a Microprocessor?" in which the authors took a microprocessor, which is a device whose logic we understand perfectly well, and recorded data from the wires, and then applied the most sophisticated data analysis techniques from neuroscience to this data. But they found that there's really no way that you could extract the compositional logical structure of this device from the data. But on the other hand, if we had a hypothesis that it's a circuit composed of logical gates in a certain way, you could try to confirm that hypothesis in the data. So it's like we don't know what we're looking for in neural data. The brain is a complex biological organ. It has tons of detail at every level of analysis, and we don't know what detail is important and that we can ignore, and which detail is really conceptually significant to the logic of the brain. So in my PhD, I approach this problem in the other direction, the green arrow. I define and study mathematical theories of the brain, where the assumptions are the most fundamental and basic principles from neuroscience. And my goal is to identify a minimal set of assumptions with which you can solve the hard problems that brains solve. So how would you do this? You might start with the most important fact from neuroscience, that all of brain computation compiles down to firing neurons, and define a model that is a big network of neurons that maybe you wire together randomly. This is biologically very realistic, but it can't do anything interesting. So I add a few more key ingredients, a few facts about how inhibition works in the brain, as well as a key fact about how neuron connections change over time. And what I discovered is that with this set of axioms, you can do something highly non-trivial. You can do language. First, you can implement parsing, which means you feed in sentences, and it will compute the grammatical structure of these sentences. so identifying the subject, the object, and so on. And I also discovered that with the same combination of assumptions, you can actually model a crucial step in language learning. It can identify which part of speech words belong to. Are they nouns and verbs and so on? To my knowledge, this is the first model of its kind, a model entirely composed of biologically realistic principles that is a mathematical model and can solve problems as complex as parsing and language learning. More importantly, if I remove any of these axioms from my model, the 5 axioms that define it, I don't know how to solve these problems. All of this suggests that these ingredients may be the important ones. They may capture the essence of how the brain computes.
Kimberly Krupa from Mechanical Engineering presents Fingerprinting Your Cartilage Just Might Save Your Knees.
500 million people in the world suffer from pain in their joints, or 1 in 5 in this room. The narrative is, I'll deal with the pain until it becomes unbearable, and then I'll get a knee replacement. But the culprit behind this is a disease called osteoarthritis, where the cartilage that cushions your hips, your knees, and even your fingers wears away until your bones are rubbing against each other, leaving you in pain. But cartilage is really an incredible material if you think about it. Imagine dangling from a cliff by just your fingertip. That's the force that your knees feel every day of your life for 80 plus years. And this function is because of the unique structure of cartilage, which is kind of like a mesh or a net, where the ropes are made of long, thin collagen fibers that are cross-linked together. And these cross-links are like knots. When you get arthritis, the very first thing that will happen is that these knots or cross-links begin to untie, and then slowly the mesh falls apart. But importantly, you won't feel any of this pain until years later when your cartilage is far more degraded. And even more importantly, your doctor also won't be able to diagnose you with arthritis until years later when your cartilage is nearly gone. So my research focuses on what if we could diagnose arthritis so much earlier and treat it earlier to avoid all of this. I use a tool called Raman spectroscopy, that's Raman not like the bowl of soup, but like an Indian physicist who discovered it, to look and count collagen crosslinks in cartilage tissue. So here's a little bit about how it works. If you imagine taking a Raman flashlight and shining it on the wall in here, you might see that there are certain peaks that appear in a spectra like you see here. So every single material in the world essentially has different number of peaks or colored peaks that will show up in a snapshot you can get with the computer. So the wall here might have 2 orange peaks, or perhaps if I pick up some of the paint on the wall, that could produce 1 blue peak. The point here is that every material is unique, and because of that, scientists can use Raman to figure out what a material is made of. So in my research, I use cartilage, and I shine a Raman laser onto cartilage tissue. And I've worked backwards to figure out which colors and peaks correspond to crosslinks. So let's say, for example, it's 1 yellow peak like you can see here. If I shine it on the cartilage and the peak is very tall, that means that there's many crosslinks in the tissue and it's likely healthy. However, if the peak is very short, that would mean there's very few crosslinks and you might have early stages of arthritis. So imagine 10 years from now, you're at your routine doctor's appointment. They scan your knee with a laser and are able to diagnose arthritis early and then also treat it early, saving you and 1/5 of this room and millions of people worldwide from years of pain, unnecessary joint replacement surgeries. Beyond that, imagine using Raman spectroscopy as a tool to diagnose so many other diseases before you can even feel or see them. Thank you.
Great job, finalists. So let's give all of our finalists a round of applause. Okay, so now it's time to vote for audience choice. For those here in Law Library, please use the QR code on your program or here on the screen to cast your vote. For those joining the live stream, please click the link in the chat to cast your vote. Select one finalist that you would like to vote for and hit submit at the bottom of the page. Please note that you can only submit one vote and only one vote can be submitted per device. We will keep the voting window open for 5 minutes.
We will now have a 10-minute intermission to tally the judges' votes and collect the audience choice votes. After intermission, we will announce the winners. For our live stream guests, we encourage you to remain in the Zoom webinar so you know when we have returned. And to those with us in person, please help yourself to food and drink until we are ready to announce the winners. Thank you. If you're watching online, it's time to tune back in as we announce the winners of the 2024 Columbia 3-Minute Thesis Competition. Thank you again to our judges for making some very difficult decisions, and thank you, audience members, for weighing in.
So we're gonna start. Our Audience Choice Award goes to Mary Kay Dwyer. Please come, yeah. Congrats. Now we're gonna announce the third place. So third place, based on our judges' scores, goes to Fitsum Hermias Petros.
For first place, we have a tie. It is my pleasure to congratulate our first place winners of the 2024 Columbia University 3-Minute Thesis Competition, Julia Davis Parada and Gloria Graff. Congratulations. All right. So, we're supposed to take pictures, sorry. This concludes the 2024 Columbia University 3-Minute Thesis Competition. Congratulations to the winners and the rest of the finalists. Thank you, judges, and thanks to all for joining us this afternoon.